Hello, I'm Dr. Aizaz from MedicoVisual.com, and in today's visual lecture, we will talk about the formation of urinary bladder. Let's go first back to the third week of development, and here is the embryo from the third week of development, and of course it consists of a trilaminar germ disc. Not superiorly, in this diagram it looks as if it is superiorly, but truly speaking it is dorsally. So dorsalmost is this cavity called amniotic cavity. So this is amniotic cavity, and this ventrally lying cavity is the yolk sac cavity, and here is the connecting stalk. Now let's cut the embryo. Let's cut the section of this embryo like this, and here is that 2D section. Again, we have talked about these things in the previous lectures, in the lecture of third week of development, but here there is that brief review of those things. So again, amniotic cavity dorsally lying, and here is the ventral side, so yolk sac cavity. So here is the ectoderm, here is the mesoderm, and here is the endoderm. Now what actually happens that, and by the way, this endoderm, it continues with the yolk sac membrane. This is the yolk sac membrane, which is the covering of yolk sac cavity. It is also called yolk sac endoderm. Now what actually happens during the third week of development, that from this yolk sac cavity a sausage like diverticulum arises, and this diverticulum, it goes into the connecting stalk like this. And this sausage-like diverticulum is called allantois. Now you may be wondering that why I am talking about allantois and why I am going into the third week of development. The reason is that allantois contributes towards the formation of urinary bladder. Then what happens that after the third week of development, during fourth week of development, the craniocaudal folding occurs, and as a result of this folding, the allantois, it comes to lie ventrally like this. And as you have seen, and you also must be knowing from the previous lecture, that here a part of this yolk sac cavity, it has been incorporated as a result of this caudal folding, and this is basically called hindgut. Let me label it for you so that you don't get confused. So here is the hindgut. So hindgut is basically this hind part of yolk sac which has been incorporated into the embryo. Similarly here, as a result of cranial folding, this is the foregut. This part is incorporated. This is the foregut, but let's just focus on the hindgut. So here is the hindgut, and just ventral to hindgut, here is this structure called allantois. Now what will happen, we will see it in 3D as well, that what will happen, that this will get divided. This part of hindgut will get divided, and this ventral part, which consists of a division of the ventral division of hindgut, I should say, along with some part of allantois like this will form the urinary bladder, and here its distal part, it will form the urethra, and this dorsal part will form the rectum and anal canal. Now let's go to a 3D diagram, and we will focus only on this portion. Let's go to the 3D model, and let's see how this hindgut and this allantois, basically it's called cloaca, how it is divided into two parts. So let's go to Blender. So here we are with this embryo, and here I have removed all other parts, and here this structure is the allantois, and this allantois here is, by the way, the hindgut. Now here you can see that this allantois is opening into hindgut, and this part, actually this distal part of hindgut along with this allantois, this is actually called cloaca. So this is cloaca. Now what is cloaca? This is the cloaca. Cloaca is basically a common pouch into which the urinary secretions, as well as the let's suppose sperm and other related secretions that are involved in reproduction, those secretions, and third is the feces. So all three types of secretions, they are put into this sac called cloaca, and in small animals there is the single opening for all these secretions. So this secretion is for reproductive function, reproductive secretions. The sac is for reproductive secretion, for the feces and for the urine. Not in humans. I am telling this for the purpose of concept. So for the making of concept, I am telling you that in small animals, this is the common sac, and here a common opening will be formed, and this common opening will be involved in release of, let's suppose, sperms. It will be involved in release of feces, and it will also be involved in release of urine. But fortunately, this does not happen in human. In human, it gets separated into two parts. It will get separated into two parts. So this ventral part, it will be involved in urogenital function, and this dorsal part, this one, it will be involved in excretion of feces. So this will form the this is the rectal part, anorectal part. This is the anorectal part, and this is the this will form the urogenital part. Now the question arises that how it actually gets divided into two parts. Now let's briefly discuss that how this cloaca, this common sac, how this common sac gets divided into two parts, the urogenital part and anorectal part. Now you must be knowing that this is basically the viscera. These are the visceras, and these visceras are surrounded by a layer of mesoderm, and this layer of mesoderm is, by the way, called intraembryonic subplanknoploric mesoderm. So let's suppose this is that visceras, and these visceras are plastered with intraembryonic subplanknoploric mesoderm like this. So let me draw it for you. So here as well, it will also be surrounded by intraembryonic subplanknoploric, which layer? Subplanknoploric mesoderm. Now this intraembryonic subplanknoploric or subplanknic mesoderm, between these two parts, between this allantois and hindgut, it will actually proliferate here between them, and it will form a wedge-like structure. A wedge-like structure will be formed between these two structures, and this wedge-like structure, it will then divide it into two parts. Let me show you how that wedge-like structure, how it looks like, and let's go into that animation to see that. So here is that wedge-like tissue that forms, and this is called urorectal septum. So this is the urorectal septum. Now what actually happens with this urorectal septum is that it forms two extensions, two fork-like extensions. So let's watch the animation. So here you can see it has formed the two fork-like extensions. If I isolate this, let's watch the animation again. So this wedge-like tissue, it forms this fork-like extensions. Now what will happen that these fork-like extensions, they will meet in the midline and they will unite together, and as they unite together, they will simply divide this cloaca into two parts, the ventral urogenital part and the dorsal anorectal part. So I hope you can understand. Let's hide these things so that you can understand it more clearly. Yeah. So let's watch the animation again. So here you can see these fork-like extensions. They will meet together in the midline to form a spoon-like structure, and as this spoon-like septum is formed, it will divide this cloaca into two parts. Now most of this urorectal septum will be destroyed, but a small part of it will remain, and this is called perineal body. It is actually a tendinous structure, a fibromuscular tendinous structure, which receives the insertion or attachment of many different muscles of the pelvis. Let's not go into its detail, and let's see what happens next. Here also note that this structure here is the cloacal membrane. So what is cloacal membrane? Cloacal membrane consists of ecto and endoderm. So here we have ectoderm and here we have endoderm. So it consists of ecto and endoderm with little to no mesoderm in between them. So generally speaking, at all places there will be some mesoderm between ecto and endoderm, but at the site of cloacal membrane as well as superiorly there is the oropharyngeal membrane as well. So at the site of cloacal and oropharyngeal membrane there is almost no mesoderm between the ecto and endoderm. Now what will happen that as this urorectal septum as it divides the cloaca into two parts, it also divides the cloacal membrane into two parts. So let's watch the animation so this concept becomes more clear to you. So here you can see that it also divided the cloacal membrane into two parts. Now this anorectal part, this is called anal membrane, and this urorectal part, not urorectal, sorry, urogenital part, here this membrane is urogenital membrane. So now the cloacal membrane has been divided into two parts. This is the urogenital membrane and this is the this is which membrane? This is the anal membrane. Slightly cranial to this urogenital membrane, here a tubercle-like structure arises, and how it arises, let me just explain it briefly to you. Now here is the ectoderm, and below the ectoderm there will be the mesoderm. So here is the mesoderm, let's draw it here. So this mesoderm, it will proliferate to form an elevation like this, and as this elevation is formed, of course the ectoderm above it will also be lifted, and as it happens, this elevation as a whole, a tubercle like structure is formed. So here that tubercle like structure will be formed, and this tubercle is called the genital tubercle. From this tubercle the penis will form in the male embryos, and in female the clitoris will be formed. Also, some changes will occur in this urogenital part of cloaca. Now, by the way, we should stop calling this urogenital part. Of course, it is urogenital part, but now it has got a special name. It is no more the urogenital part of cloaca because it has lost the connection with cloaca. So now we should start calling it the urogenital sinus. So this is called urogenital sinus. Now some changes will occur with the within this overall structure of urogenital sinus like this, and then what will happen that here is the tail eminence or caudal eminence of the embryo. Of course, humans don't have tail, so most of it will be mostly lost, and as it happens, some changes will occur in overall shape of the embryo, and it will become more like this. And now we can see that here we have got some different parts of this urogenital sinus. Let's hide this hindgut part. We don't need it. Let's not just discuss it. So now let's focus on the allantois. Now first, what happens that this connection of this urogenital sinus with the allantois, it will become very narrow. And here this tube-like connection of allantois, initially it was a tube-like connection of allantois here. This is called urachus. By the way, if you want to learn more about allantois, there is a complete lecture on allantois available on MedicoVisual's YouTube channel. So this connection of allantois, this tube-like thing here, this tube-like connection which is going into this connecting stalk, it is called, and by the way, connecting stalk is now, it has now formed the umbilical cord. So this tube-like connection is called urachus. It is called, what it is called, let's write it here. It is called urachus. Later what will happen, that this connection urachus, it will be lost and it will become a solid ligamentous structure like this. So this ligamentous structure, it will be connecting this apex of urinary bladder to the umbilicus, and this ligament is called median umbilical. It's not medial, it is median umbilical ligament. So this medial umbilical ligament in adults is basically the remnant of urachus. And now we can see that this urogenital part we can roughly divide into different parts with no clear-cut demarcations or boundaries. And by the way, what are those parts? So let me label it for you. So somewhat here, this part which includes the proximal part of cloaca as well. So this part somewhat here, this part will actually form the urinary bladder, and other name of bladder is vesicle. So this is vesicle part. This is the vesicle part of urogenital sinus. Then here is the pelvic part. Here is the pelvic part of urogenital sinus, and here is the last part of urinary sinus. Now this last part of urinary sinus, it is closely associated with the genital tubercle, and genital tubercle in males will form penis, and in females it will form the analog of penis, that is clitoris. So with that reference, this part of urogenital sinus, it is given the name phallic part or phallus part. I think it is called phallic part. Phallic means something that is related with penis. So it has that intimate relationship with the developing penis or developing clitoris. So that is why it is called phallic part of urogenital sinus. Of course, we will discuss one by one that what structures they form. But before that, let me show you the median umbilical ligament. So here is the urinary bladder, and here is the umbilicus, also called belly button, and here is this connection called urachus, not urachus. Urachus was the tube which has now solidified, and it has regressed a lot to form a ligamentous structure, and this ligamentous structure which is connecting this apex of urinary bladder to this umbilicus or belly button, this is called median umbilical ligament. So this is the median umbilical ligament. Now let's go back to formation of urinary bladder. Now do you remember that within this cloaca, or now it is called urogenital sinus, now within this urogenital sinus, the mesonephric duct entered into it. So mesonephric duct poured into this urogenital sinus, and near its distal end, near its point of entry, just close to it, two invaginations, bilateral invagination, they arise from this mesonephric duct, and these are called, what they are called, these are called ureteric buds. And these ureteric buds, they were going into the metanephric kidneys. Please watch the lecture on the development of kidneys if you fail to understand this lecture. So let me just draw these structures. So remember, here was that developing kidney, metanephric kidney, and this ureteric bud at one end, it was opening into this mesonephric duct, and at the other end it was taking the secretions, the urine actually, from the metanephric or developing kidneys. So this ureteric bud is actually the ureter. This is the definitive ureter. Ultimately, of course, it will form the definitive ureter. So, and by the way, this mesonephric duct, it will form the ejaculatory duct in males, Not in females. In females, ultimately, it will actually form in females as well, and it will form the trigone of bladder. Let me show you here. In both males and females, it will form the trigone of bladder, but ultimately, after the formation of trigone, its other parts which do not contribute towards the formation of bladder, trigone of bladder, they will be lost, they will be destroyed. So let's see what happens. Now this distal part of mesonephric duct, it will be actually incorporated into this back wall of urogenital sinus, or back wall of this part of this vesical part of urogenital sinus, which is actually going to form the urinary bladder. And how it is going to be incorporated, let me show you. So here what will happen, that this mesonephric duct, its distal end, they will swell up and they will form a sort of something like mouth of a trumpet, as the Larsons put it out. So here you can see it swells up like mouths of trumpet, and of course they are still inside this urinary bladder. And then what will happen, that the cranial end of this trumpet, it will become more flattened. So let me show you, let's draw it here. So here is the trumpet and here is the mouth of trumpet, like this. Now what will happen, that this is the cranial end, it will flatten more, it will proliferate and it will flatten more like this. And as it happen, of course, it's cranial or anterior, this is the anterior wall, so here is the anterior wall. So its interior wall is harboring this ureteric bud. So as it will flatten up and this interior wall will be shifted somewhat here, this ureteric bud, it will be also incorporated and into this urinary bladder, and it will start opening directly into the urinary bladder. This will become more clear when you clearly watch this animation. Please focus on it. I know this concept is a bit hard to understand, but the good news is that you do not need to know the mechanism. So here you can see, here is that head of trumpet, not head, this is the cranial part of that mouth of trumpet, and this cranial part of mouth of trumpet, it opened more, it flattened more, and as it happened, this cranial, this ventral wall, here you can see along its ventral wall, here is the ureteric bud, opening of ureteric bud or ureter, definitive ureter. Now it is directly opening into this dorsal wall or posterior wall of urinary bladder. Let's watch the animation again so that you really understand it properly. So let's go back. So here you can see first it swelled up, and ultimately you can see that ureter is directly opening now into this dorsal wall of urinary bladder. And as this mesonephric duct, as this distal end of mesonephric duct, as it got incorporated into this urinary bladder, now here it formed a triangular smooth shape here. It actually formed a smooth triangular structure here in the dorsal wall of the urinary bladder, and this is called trigone of urinary bladder. Now next what will happen, that this ureters, these bilaterally, these ureters, they will move craniolaterally, they will come somewhat here. Why they move craniolaterally? I don't know, but one of the hypotheses is that the kidneys were initially the pelvic structure, but as they ascend upward, they will pull the ureter craniolaterally, and as these ureters are pulled craniolaterally, of course they will come to lie somewhat here, and through some unknown mechanisms, these mesonephric ducts, which are now the ejaculatory ducts, they will move slightly inferiorly like this. So that's how this equilateral triangular smooth posterior wall of the urinary bladder, which is called trigone of bladder, this is how it actually forms. Let's watch the animation again so that you understand it properly. Let's watch the animation from the beginning. So here you can see that how it actually forms. Now let's suppose that this was the male embryo and here is that vesicle part. This is the vesicle part which has formed the urinary bladder. It has done its job. Now here the prostate will be formed somewhat here. How prostate forms, that we will not discuss today. We will discuss that in later lectures. So prostate will be formed, and this part of urogenital sinus which is going into the prostate, which is going here into the prostate like this part of urogenital sinus, this part is now called, it has now formed the urethra. And which part of urethra? Now it has formed the prostatic part of urethra. And below the urethra, what will happen, that a muscular diaphragm will be formed. So here is this muscular diaphragm. It is called pelvic diaphragm. It consists of several different muscles of the pelvis. And here the circular muscles will be formed, and they will act as urinary sphincter. So urinary sphincter is also there, and along with that here is that pelvic diaphragm. And this part of urethra, it is called membranous urethra. So we have prostatic urethra and membranous urethra. So these two parts, they develop from which part of urogenital sinus? They develop from the second part of urogenital sinus, which is called pelvic part. And the third part, this is the phallic part, and it is in a close intimate relationship with the genital tubercle. And as the genital tubercle forms the penis, it will also elongate to form the penile urethra, which is also called spongy urethra. Now don't ask me that how the penis is formed and how the penile urethra is formed. We will discuss that later, but here it was just a sneak peek to make you remember that what structures develop from different parts of the urogenital sinus. Now let's just review it here. So here we have the which part? Here is the vesicle part, which consists of some proximal part of allantois. Somewhat here there will be some proximal contribution of allantois. So proximal part of allantois along with the vesicle part of urogenital sinus, they will form the urinary bladder. Now most of the urinary bladder, it is derived from these structures, except some part at the dorsal wall which develops from the incorporation of mesonephric duct, and this part is called trigone. Here is the trigone of bladder, trigone of urinary bladder. So vesicle part will form the urinary bladder. Then here both of these two parts of urogenital sinus, they are the pelvic part. So pelvic part in males, in females it's different. In males it will form prostatic urethra, as well as the, here there is the membranous urethra. And finally the third part of urethra, it develops from the phallic part, and this phallic part will form which urethra? Penile urethra, which is also called spongy urethra, because it is surrounded by a spongy tissue of the penis. So this was about the male. Now what is the story of female? Of course this urinary bladder along with the story of trigone of bladder, this is same in males as well as female. The only difference is in the pelvic part, in the fate of pelvic part as well as the phallic part. So here we have the female embryo, and the story is much simpler in the females. In female the urethra is much shorter, and of course there is no prostate. So Vesical part is going to form urinary bladder, but in female the pelvic part, it is not going to form the prostatic urethra because there is no prostate. It is going to form complete urethra, including this membranous part of urethra. So it is going to form the complete urethra. And what about this third part, the phallus part? Because there is no penis here, this genital tubercle, it does not elongate to form penis, it remains shorter, right? It remains shorter to form the clitoris. So what will happen that here, this distal part, it will elongate craniocaudally. It will elongate craniocaudally like this to form the vestibule of vagina. Now what is vestibule? Let me tell you what happens, that into this vestibule the vagina will also open. Now here is the vestibule and here is the urinary meatus, opening of urethra, and here is the opening of vagina. So there are two openings. What is vestibule? Of course, let me briefly explain you here and then we will see a diagram as well. Now somewhat here there will be the, what is this? Clitoris, and here there will be the labia minora like this. Here is the labia minora, the inner lips of the vagina, or vulva I should say, to be more precise, not vagina, it is vulva. So here is the labia minora and outside that will be the labia majora like this. So labia majora. Now in between the labia minora and here is the posterior commissure, and craniocaudally if we talk about, so here is the clitoris at one end and the other end there is the posterior commissure. So in between all these structure, this sort of opening or cavity, single cavity or single opening or single depression, and this depression, it consists of two openings. It consists of urinary meatus, external urinary meatus, as well as the vaginal opening. So this cavity which harbors the two openings, the urinary opening as well as the vaginal opening, this common cavity is called vestibule of vagina. Vestibule of vagina, or it is also called vulvar vestibule. So in male embryos, the phallic part of urogenital sinus, in male embryos it forms the penile urethra. But because there is no penis in female, it expands craniocaudally to form the vestibule of vagina. So let's rewrite it here. So pelvic part in female embryo, it forms complete urethra including membranous. So it forms the complete urethra including membranous urethra, and the phallic part or phallus part, it forms the vestibule of vagina or vulvar vestibule. Let me show you the diagram of vestibule of vagina so it becomes more clear. So here you can see, here is the clitoris, here is the inner lip, labia minora, and here is the vagina. Now this common depression or common cavity here which is between the clitoris, labia minoras, two labia minoras, and this posterior commissure, this common cavity which harbors the opening of urethral, which harbors the urethral opening or urethral meatus as well as the vaginal opening, this is called vestibule of vagina. And this vestibule of vagina, it develops from the phallic part of urogenital sinus. In embryology, the most important thing is to learn and to master that what component develops from which structure. So now you precisely know that and the reason behind that. Thank you so much for watching this video.